Casual content, Wrath of the Lich King versus now. Okay, let's talk about casuals. And casual, it's not a dirty word. The problem is that it often gets conflated with some questionable changes to the game. All the time I hear people say that since LFR was introduced and since the abilities were pruned, it's World of Casual Craft because it's designed for the casuals. Well, I kind of disagree. World of Casual Craft, in a way, was Wrath of the Lich King. What do I mean by this? Well, I think Wrath of the Lich King is the expansion that had the best casual experience. First though, when I say casual, I'm referring to the amount of time that you dedicate to the game. If you LFR for 7 days a week on a bunch of characters, you ain't a casual. If you pet battle for like 10 hours a day, you're pretty fucking hardcore about it. You can be casual and also be very skilled. You can be hardcore and be less skilled. It's all about time, and how Blizzard designs content for people with different amounts of time to dedicate to the game. Now, for those of you who are not around during Wrath of the Lich King, here is pretty much how the casual experience went. You had a bunch of small one-boss raids, or maybe a few more in the case of Vault of Archivon, so there was Sarth, there was Eye of Eternity, and then of course VOA. VOA started with one boss, but eventually it got 4 as the patches went on. Naxxramas was also quite open in its format, so a pug could pretty much aim at a few different bosses, and that was generally quite viable. However, Nax was unfortunately not the best raid ever because it was probably too easy. I mean, nearly definitely too easy. They also added a Nixia, and then later Hallion. No one really gave a shit about Hallion. What having these small encounters did is they essentially basically filled the niche that LFR currently fills, but the key advantage about them is you are grouping up with other players, experiencing content in a more social setting that actually requires a level of coordination. Since these were generally pretty short and sweet, you could probably do 1 or 2 of them in the space of an LFR wing. The same-ish amount of time would be spent, but Wrath of the Lich King offered a better gameplay experience for that niche. Wrath also had a weekly raid quest, which would just send you back to one of the raids to kill a boss. Now, trade chat would just be stuffed full of players organising raids to take these bosses down, and that's another way in which Wrath of the Lich King encouraged casual content that had a high gameplay value. And yeah, going out, killing a raid boss in a group, that can be casual content if it's put into the game right. VOA was also interesting because it got the casual player base of a server really interested in doing Wintergrasp. This meant that, as a casual player, you would log in, you would see the WG was about to happen, and all of a sudden you were in a situation where the game had just presented you with lots of content to do for the evening. You would go in, you'd fight a big battle, and then hopefully if you won, you'd hop into VOA, get yourself some sweet loot. But loot that was earned via actually doing some mechanics. The raids themselves also had a lot of different difficulty levels. 10 player was easier than 25, and both of their heroics were pretty much different difficulty levels. Once heroic was added into the game, of course. You essentially had the equivalent of today's normal mode. It was pug-friendly, and while groups would generally only kill the first few bosses of a raid, it offered gameplay and a really solid reward, which honestly is a lot better than what LFR actually does. This still probably seems really simple to you, but the point is that you would log in and there would be a bunch of decently raid-related stuff to do that had both a strong reward and engaging gameplay. For the hardcore raiders, well, you just hop into your raid, you get killing stuff much in the same way as you do now. And even when I transitioned into being a multiple night a week raider, on the Guild's A-team, this extra content, i.e. the smaller raids, it gave me something to do in between the main raid nights, which was very enjoyable. Now, dungeons also deserve a mention, and I'm going to speak in terms of Valor and Justice points here, even though that's not what they were called back then, but everyone understands what Valor and Justice is. Having that currency really just drove you to do some of that dungeon content, and for casual players, this was super important, since they generally spend less time playing the game than hardcore people. That means they spend less time engaging with their class's mechanics, which yeah, does mean that a casual player is probably less likely to be as good as your average hardcore player. It makes sense, but driving those casual players through these dungeons for currency was an effective way to get some actual training in. The LFD system doubled down on this, and whether that was a good move or not is probably up to debate. Personally, I'm happy enough with its existence, but if you compare gearing up via dungeons and those smaller raids to gearing up via LFR today, well, those dungeons and raids still put more pressure on people to actually play the game, whereas nowadays with LFR, I mean, you actually, I think Preach proved it, you don't have to touch the keyboard. You just have to make sure you don't get kicked from the group, which is a really sad state. They also added 4 new dungeons during this expansion, and dungeons, by the way, dungeons for the most part are casual content. Think about it. For the Bleeding Edge raiders, well, dungeons are generally irrelevant past alts. The 3 ICC dungeons were particularly fantastic because they offered a nice spike up in difficulty, which was high quality, casual content that helps people learn, which was so good because ICC 10, which was probably spurred on by these 3 brilliant dungeons, was such a successful period for the game. Now, in spite of all of this casualness, which I think was actually really great, we still have the likes of ICC and Ulduar, 2 of the most memorable raids in this game's existence. And hell, we even had Sartharian 3 Drakes, which at the time was one of the hardest fights there was. That said, the game's hardcore raid audience was woefully underserved by Naxxramas and Trial of the Crusader, and that is a fact that we shouldn't forget. Now, on the topic of TOC, by being a small raid again, it meant that it was kind of pug-friendly. Something that's definitely worth noting in light of the massive and, by the way, generally brilliant raid instances that we get today. So what is all of this casual content that I talked about being replaced with? Well, LFR has taken the stead of nearly all of it. Before Flex Mode was added, LFR quite literally was a direct replacement, and for the longest time LFR made dungeon content irrelevant, though of course Mythic Dungeons have hopefully started the reversal of that trend. I can't really speak for others here, but when I advocate for LFR not existing, I'm not arguing for casual players to have their content removed. I'm arguing for good quality content for casual players, because I don't think that LFR really serves those people that well. Certainly, when I'm playing the game casually, it doesn't serve me well. I don't find it to be fun, and I did find the past stuff to be fun. I mean, do a little thought experiment on yourself here. Would you have more fun fending off sleep in an LFR wing, or pugging a bunch of raid bosses, and getting some cool loot and going out with a raid instance or a raid party of people? I think the latter is definitely more fun. In spite of Blizzard making all of these concessions for the air quotes casuals, I think they've ended up making a game that has actually got worse casual content. Hell, the group that is coming off the best right now is indeed the Raiders. So in Legion, what I would rather see is no LFR, but more dungeons, currency surrounding those dungeons, and most importantly of all, and we're not going to get this, but smaller raids which are pug-friendly, just like how it was in Wrath of the Lich King. I think that was such a linchpin of that expansion success. The funny thing is that within the context of casual gameplay, the slate of content that would be in a more Wrath of the Lich King style of doing things for the casual players, it would be harder and more casual friendly. Yeah, it would take more work to make, but I think Blizzard have them in them. I really hope they have it in them. Ultimately, I think most of the people who play the game are actually casual players, and if the Wrath numbers show us anything, that's when those players were catered to with content that was really good. So what I would say is overall, casual content doesn't have to mean super dumbed down content, it doesn't have to mean bad content. It could just be going off, doing one boss, which is maybe pretty tricky, but it's fine because you're going off, you're doing one boss, it's generally a pretty quick thing, hopefully there's not that much trash, and you can have a fun little contained 40-minute experience and then you can leave. The game has got the pre-made group finder, it's got flexible difficulty, it's got so many more systems which really would benefit this casual content, but it doesn't actually have the things to do with those systems, which is, it's like pull your own hair out levels of frustration. I mean, really, they had such a good thing going, and, yeah. Look, hopefully they improve things. And certainly in Legion, you know, they have said they want to make dungeons more important. I'm totally down with that. The Mythic Dungeon system would suggest that's something that they want to do in general. LFR was less important when it came to patch 6.2, so maybe there is some hope for the future, maybe there isn't, we'll just have to wait and see. That is the nature of things when we're talking about hypotheticals and, well, expansions that we don't actually know that many details about yet. But anyway, that is it for now. Thank you very much for watching the video. Let me know what you think down in the comments or via my Twitter, and I'll see you next time.